God's call and covenant with Abraham. The story of Abraham begins in Genesis 12 when God calls him by his original name, Abram, instructing him to leave his homeland and travel to an unknown land that God would show him. Abram was originally from Ur of the Chaldees, a region that is now part of modern-day Iraq. He lived there with his wife, Sarai, and his nephew, Lot. Abram came from a family of idol worshippers, but God chose him to fulfill a unique role in his divine plan. God's call to Abram was clear and purposeful. In Genesis 12 verse 1-3, God makes a profound promise to Abram. Leave your country, your people and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. God continues with the promise. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. These promises, known as the Abrahamic covenant, laid the foundation for the rest of Abraham's life and the entire biblical narrative concerning the nation of Israel. It was a covenant of faith and obedience, for Abram had no knowledge of where God was leading him or how these promises would be fulfilled. Abram's journey to Canaan. Without hesitation, Abram obeyed. At the age of 75, he took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all their possessions and set out for the land of Canaan. This journey was not just physical, but also spiritual, representing a transition from the life Abram knew to a life completely dependent on God's promises. Upon arriving in Canaan, God appeared to Abram again and reaffirmed the promise of land. To your offspring I will give this land. Genesis 12:7. In response, Abram built an altar to the Lord, marking the land as sacred and dedicating it to God. Abram in Egypt. Shortly after settling in Canaan, a severe famine struck the land, forcing Abram and his family to seek refuge in Egypt. This part of the narrative introduces a moral dilemma and highlights Abram's human flaws. Fearing for his life because of Sarai's beauty, Abram instructs her to say she is his sister rather than his wife. Abram believed that the Egyptians would kill him to take Sarai if they knew she was his wife. As a result, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, took Sarai into his household, believing her to be Abram's sister. However, God intervened by sending plagues upon Pharaoh and his household, revealing the truth. Pharaoh, angered but respectful of God's power, returned Sarai to Abram and sent them away from Egypt with their possessions. Return to Canaan. Abram and his family left Egypt and returned to Canaan, where they had originally settled. By this point, both Abram and Lot had become extremely wealthy, particularly in livestock, gold, and silver. Their wealth became a source of contention as the land could not support both their herds and possessions. Quarreling arose between the herdsmen of Abram and Lot, signaling the need for separation. Lot's choice. In a display of humility and grace, Abram gave Lot the choice of land. Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. God's promise reaffirmed. After Lot departed, God spoke to Abram again, reaffirming the promise of land and descendants. Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. The Battle of Kings. The next chapter of Abram's story involves a complex political situation between various kings in the region. A coalition of 4 kings, led by King Kedorlaomer of Elam, Sodom, and Gomorrah. Abram's intervention. Upon hearing of Lot's capture, Abram immediately assembled 318 trained men from his household and pursued the invaders. In a daring nighttime attack, Abram's forces defeated the 4 kings, rescued Lot, and recovered all the stolen goods and captives. 3. Meeting Melchizedek. After his victory, Abram was met by Melchizedek, the king of Salem and a priest of God Most High. Melchizedek blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. In response, Abram gave Melchizedek 1/10 of everything he had recovered, establishing a practice of tithing that would later become significant in Jewish religious traditions. Abram's encounter with Melchizedek is one of the more mysterious episodes in the Bible, as Melchizedek appears briefly but is considered a symbol of Christ in Christian theology, refusing the king of Sodom's reward. After the battle, the king of Sodom offered Abram a reward, allowing him to keep the goods he had recovered. However, Abram refused, saying, I have raised my hand to the Lord, God Most High. Abram's refusal of Sodom's reward. After the battle, the king of Sodom offered Abram the spoils of war, saying, Give me the people and keep the goods for yourself. However, Abram declined the offer. He replied to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and have taken an oath that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, I made Abram rich. Abram's refusal emphasized his dependence on God alone for blessings and prosperity. He didn't want his success to be attributed to anyone but God. God's promise of offspring. In Genesis 15, God spoke to Abram in a vision, assuring him once again of his protection and blessings. Abram expressed his concern about being childless, questioning how God's promise of descendants could be fulfilled if he had no heir. He said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Genesis 15:2-3, referring to Eliezer of Damascus, a loyal servant. God responded by reassuring Abram that Eliezer would not be his heir. Instead, Abram's own child would inherit his blessings. God then took Abram outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, so shall your offspring be. Genesis 15:5. Abram believed in the Lord, and this belief was credited to him as righteousness. The covenant of pieces. To solidify his promise, God made a formal covenant with Abram, known as the covenant of pieces. God instructed Abram to bring certain animals, a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon, and cut them in two, arranging the halves opposite each other. This was a traditional way to ratify covenants in the ancient Near East. As Abram waited, a deep sleep fell upon him, and God revealed to him a prophecy. Abram's descendants would be strangers in a foreign land, where they would be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years, a reference to the future enslavement of Israel in Egypt. However, God promised to deliver them and punish their oppressors. Afterward, Abram's descendants would return to Canaan and possess the land. As time passes and Sarai remains barren, she grows impatient. Following the customs of the time, she offers her maidservant Hagar to Abram as a surrogate. Hagar conceives a son, Ishmael. However, tension soon arises between Sarai and Hagar, leading Hagar to flee. Yet God finds her in the wilderness, promising that her son will become the father of a great nation. Hagar returns to Abram and Ishmael is born. This event marks the complexities in Abram's household and foreshadows future tensions between Ishmael's descendants and those of Abram's future son. This pivotal moment in the story of Abraham marks a deepening of the relationship between God and Abraham. The covenant of circumcision is introduced as an everlasting sign of the promises God made to Abraham. And it's here that God reveals that Abraham will have a son named Isaac through his wife Sarah. Despite their old age, God's appearance to Abraham, when Abraham is 99 years old, God appears to him once again, identifying himself as El Shaddai, God Almighty. This title emphasizes God's supreme power, setting the stage for the incredible promise that's about to be revealed. God tells Abraham, "Walk before me faithfully and be blameless." indicating that Abraham's continued obedience is key to fulfilling the covenant. The covenant of circumcision. God renews his covenant with Abraham, reaffirming that he will make Abraham the father of many nations. It's at this point that God changes Abram's name to Abraham, which means father of a multitude. This name change symbolizes Abraham's new identity and his divine calling to be the patriarch of many nations. As a sign of this everlasting covenant, God commands Abraham to institute circumcision for himself and all the males in his household. Every male among Abraham's descendants must be circumcised on the 8th day after birth. This physical act serves as a permanent reminder of God's promise and Abraham's special relationship with God. Circumcision becomes a marker of those who belong to the chosen people, setting them apart from other nations. God explains that anyone who refuses to be circumcised will be cut off from the people because they have broken the covenant. This shows the seriousness of the agreement and the lasting nature of the promise of Isaac. Though Abraham now knows that he is destined to be the father of many nations, he still has no son by Sarah. In a remarkable moment, God tells Abraham that Sarah herself will bear a child. To signify her own transformation, God changes her name from Sarai to Sarah, meaning princess. This change is symbolic of the fact that kings and nations will come from her. Abraham reacts with astonishment and laughter. The idea of him, a 99-year-old man, and Sarah, who is 90, having a child seems impossible. Abraham says to God, "Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? Despite his laughter, Abraham's faith in God's power remains. God reassures him that this promised child will be named Isaac, meaning laughter, a reminder of Abraham's reaction. Isaac will be the child through whom the covenant will be fulfilled, not Ishmael, the son Abraham had with Hagar. Though Ishmael will also be blessed and become the father of a great nation, it is through Isaac that God's promises will be established. The visitors. Sometime later, 3 visitors appeared to Abraham as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. Recognizing them as messengers from God, Abraham hurried to welcome them, offering food, water, and rest. The visitors accepted his hospitality, and as they ate, one of them asked, "Where is your wife Sarah?" When Abraham replied that she was inside the tent, the visitor delivered an astonishing promise. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son." Sarah's laughter. Sarah, overhearing this from inside the tent, laughed to herself in disbelief, thinking, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? But is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." As the 3 visitors prepared to leave, they revealed their plan to investigate the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot, Abraham approached God with a bold request. "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it?" The angels visit Lot. After Abraham's intercession, the 2 angels, disguised as men, arrived at Sodom in the evening. Lot, Abraham's nephew, was sitting at the city gate, and upon seeing the strangers, he urged them to stay at his house for the night rather than in the public square. Initially, they declined, but Lot insisted, demonstrating the hospitality characteristic of his uncle. Once inside, Lot prepared a meal for them, but before they could settle in for the night, the men of Sodom surrounded the house. These men demanded that Lot send out his guests so that they could know them, a biblical euphemism for sexual assault. This act reveals the extreme wickedness of the city. Lot's attempt to protect the guests. In a desperate attempt to protect the angels, Lot offered the crowd his 2 virgin daughters instead, pleading with them to leave his guests unharmed. However, the crowd refused and became even more violent, threatening to break down the door. At this moment, the angels intervened, pulling Lot back inside and striking the men outside with blindness, rendering them unable to find the door. They then revealed their true identity and purpose to Lot. "Do you have anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place." The angels explained that the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah had reached God, and they had been sent to destroy it. Lot and his family escaped. Lot rushed to warn his future sons-in-law, who were betrothed to his daughters, but they thought he was joking. At dawn, the angels urged Lot to take his wife and daughters and leave the city immediately. However, Lot hesitated, and the angels had to seize his hand and the hands of his family to drag them out of the city. As they fled, one of the angels warned, "Flee for your lives. Don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away." Lot, fearing that he would not make it to the mountains in time, pleaded to flee to a nearby small town called Zoar, and his request was granted. The angels promised to spare Zoar from destruction. The destruction. As soon as Lot and his family reached safety, God rained down burning sulfur from the sky, destroying Sodom, Gomorrah, and all the surrounding plain, including the people and the vegetation. It was a catastrophic judgment on the wickedness of these cities. Tragically, Lot's wife disobeyed the angel's warning. She looked back at the city as it was being destroyed, and as a result, she was turned into a pillar of salt. This moment serves as a powerful symbol of the consequences of disobedience and attachment to a sinful past. Lot's aftermath. Lot and his 2 daughters eventually settled in a cave in the mountains after fleeing Zoar. In an act of desperation and misjudgment, Lot's daughters, believing that no men were left on earth, got their father drunk and conceived children by him. The eldest daughter gave birth to Moab, the ancestor of the Moabites, and the younger daughter gave birth to Ben-Ami, the ancestor of the Ammonites. These 2 nations would later become adversaries of Israel, descendants of Abraham. The fulfillment of God's promise. Despite all the challenges and years of waiting, God's promise to Abraham and Sarah was finally fulfilled. When Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90, Isaac was born. This miraculous birth was an act of God's grace, as Sarah had been barren for many years and had passed the age of childbearing. Isaac's name, which means he laughs, was a reminder of both Abraham and Sarah's initial laughter at the idea of having a child in their old age. Yet now, their laughter was one of joy and amazement at God's faithfulness. Sarah's jealousy. As Isaac grew, tension developed between Sarah and Hagar, particularly as Ishmael, Hagar's son, played with Isaac. Sarah, protective of her son's inheritance, became jealous and demanded that Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away. "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." Though this demand greatly distressed Abraham, especially because Ishmael was also his son, God reassured him, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring." Hagar and Ishmael in the wilderness. The next morning, Abraham gave Hagar and Ishmael food and water and sent them away. They wandered in the desert of Beersheba, and when the water ran out, Hagar, in despair, placed her son under a bush and walked away, not wanting to see him die. However, God heard the boy's cries, and an angel called to Hagar from heaven, "Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Genesis 21:17-18. God then opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water, which saved both her and Ishmael. Ishmael grew up in the desert, became an archer, and eventually settled in the region of Paran, where his mother found him a wife from Egypt. Abraham's interactions with King Abimelech of Gerar illustrate the patriarch's growing influence in the region. Abimelech, recognizing that God was with Abraham in all that he did, sought to make a treaty with him, asking for honesty and fairness in their dealings. Abraham agreed, but before finalizing the treaty, he expressed a grievance about a well that Abimelech's servants had seized. Abimelech, unaware of the situation, resolved it by restoring the well to Abraham. To seal their agreement, Abraham gave Abimelech 7 ewe lambs, and the two made a covenant at the site, which became known as Beersheba, meaning well of the oath. This place would later hold significant importance for Abraham and his descendants. God's test. Perhaps the most famous and profound event in Abraham's life is the binding of Isaac, also known as the Akedah in Jewish tradition. God tested Abraham's faith by commanding him to sacrifice his son Isaac on a mountain in the region of Moriah. "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Genesis 22 verse 2. This command was shocking, as Isaac was the child of promise through whom God had said Abraham's descendants would come. Yet Abraham, in an extraordinary act of faith, prepared to obey. The journey to Moriah. Abraham rose early the next morning, took Isaac, 2 servants, and wood for the burnt offering, and set out for Moriah. On the 3rd day he saw the place in the distance. Abraham told his servants to stay behind while he and Isaac went to worship, saying, "We will worship and then we will come back to you." Genesis 22:5, indicating his faith that both he and Isaac would return. As they ascended the mountain, Isaac, carrying the wood for the offering, innocently asked his father, "The fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham replied, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son," a response filled with faith and prophecy. 3. The angel's intervention. When they reached the place God had designated, Abraham built an altar and bound Isaac, placing him on the wood. As Abraham raised the knife to slay his son, the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." At that moment, Abraham saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns, and he offered it as a sacrifice in place of Isaac. Abraham named the place Jehovah-Jireh, meaning the Lord will provide, commemorating God's provision. God's promise reaffirmed after the test. God reaffirmed his covenant with Abraham, swearing by himself that because Abraham had obeyed and not withheld his son, his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. They would possess the gates of their enemies, and through Abraham's offspring, all nations on earth would be blessed. The death of Sarah. Sarah lived to be 127 years old, and after her death in Hebron, Abraham mourned her and sought to find a suitable burial place. He negotiated with the Hittites for the cave of Machpelah, which was owned by Ephron the Hittite. Though Ephron initially offered to give Abraham the land, Abraham insisted on paying for it, and the two agreed on a price of 400 shekels of silver. This cave, along with the fields surrounding it, became the first piece of land that Abraham owned in Canaan, and it would be the burial place for him and many of his descendants. Isaac and Rebekah. Abraham's instructions. As Abraham grew older, he became concerned about finding a suitable wife for Isaac. Not wanting Isaac to marry a Canaanite woman, Abraham instructed his chief servant, Eliezer, to return to his homeland and find a wife from among his relatives. Abraham made Eliezer swear that he would not take Isaac back to Mesopotamia, but would bring a bride to Canaan. Eliezer, unsure of how to proceed, prayed for a sign from God to guide him. He asked that when he arrived at a well, the woman who offered him water and also offered to water his camels would be the one God had chosen for Isaac. As Eliezer arrived at the well, Rebekah, the granddaughter of Abraham's brother Nahor, approached. When Eliezer asked her for a drink, she not only gave him water, but also offered to water his camels. Exactly the sign Eliezer had prayed for. Recognizing God's hand in the matter, Eliezer gave her gifts and asked to meet her family. Rebekah's family welcomed him, and after hearing his story, they agreed that this was from the Lord. Though her family wanted her to stay a few more days, Rebekah, full of faith, agreed to leave immediately. She traveled back with Eliezer and met Isaac in the fields. Isaac took Rebekah as his wife, and she became a comfort to him after his mother Sarah's death. The death of Abraham. After Sarah's death, Abraham took another wife, Keturah, who bore him several children, including Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. These descendants would go on to form their own nations. However, Isaac remained the primary heir of Abraham's estate and the covenant promises. At the age of 175, Abraham passed away. He was buried beside Sarah in the cave of Machpelah by Isaac and Ishmael, who came together to honor their father. Abraham's legacy. The story of Abraham is one of deep faith, obedience, and trust in God's promises. Despite many trials, moments of doubt, and personal failures, Abraham remained steadfast in his belief that God would fulfill his covenant. Through Abraham's lineage, the nation of Israel would emerge, and ultimately the promise that all nations on earth will be blessed would be fulfilled through Jesus Christ, a descendant of Abraham. Abraham's journey from Ur to Canaan, his covenant with God, and his role as the father of many nations has made him one of the most significant figures in the Bible and in the history of the three great monotheistic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.